Yu-Gi-Oh! Is undergoing yet another casual versus competitive debate. YCS Indianapolis just wrapped up, with Age of Overlord, Yu-Gi-Oh's most impactful set of 2023, now being legal for competitive play. But most people who clicked on this video know what the pro player fallout from this event really was. It mostly started from this tweet from Pakawat Parmansa. This is the worst format I've ever played. Followed up with 1,000 different decks with people putting in random non-engine and some with no non-engine at all. Unplayable going second. Probably gonna work behind a booth for YCS Richmond. Obviously, he ended up walking back these statements, but many other players in the community echoed his sentiment. Right after, he posted a picture with the caption, "This format great," posing with some of the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh players of all time. The thing they all had in common? They got knocked out in the first 9 rounds of Swiss. So the debate ensues. Joshua Schmidt has to lean in. Every pro player has to lean in. The comments are on fire. Oh my goodness, what am I supposed to make of this? And I'm gonna be real, I'm not watching all of that. Except for the fact that I did, and I'm gonna go ahead and take some of the points and bullet them so we can all kind of take away from this. So I want to make a bulletin on what pro players want in this game, and maybe you could follow along as well. Maybe you agree with these sentiments, or maybe you're a casual who just likes a bunch of cool decks that are viable in the format for your locals. And shoot, there are even some good players who are on your side when it comes to that. Me. It's literally me. I'm not a good player though. And I'm being serious. That is a good mentality to have because, you know, these pro players are better technically skilled than you are. So you got to find a way to pull a win out of the hat, because if you play regular Yu-Gi-Oh with them, you're going to lose. So yeah, pick a strategy that's low to the ground. It's literally why I played Kashtira for the entirety of last format.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
I'm not that cool, but yeah, I'll do what it takes to win. I'll get there one day. That aside, going into YCS Indianapolis, there were literally 20 decks, and I am not going to name all of them, but Rescue Ace, Manadium, Tearlaments, Pearly, Unchained, Labyrinth, Manadium, McHonk, and to boot, most of these decks just did completely different things. This all out of the way, in this 20 deck format, there are literally 20 viable decks. Any deck can beat any deck. It really doesn't matter what deck you play at the end of the day. The biggest problem, however, is not your deck selection, but your non-engine selection. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, as in most card games, but even more so here, deck building is extremely important. Yu-Gi-Oh! Is a game that is all about the opening 5 cards in your hand. We're not drawing up to 7 and then getting a mulligan. We are stuck with the opening 5. They need to be as useful as possible in game 1. We don't want bricks. You couldn't walk into this 20 deck format and play one particular card that would dominate the whole format. Let's say like Droll and Lockbird. About maybe 60 to 70% of the time, Droll and Lockbird would be a useful card. But 30% of the time you draw it, it's a complete brick. In a card game that is all about your opening 5 cards and how useful they are. So let's say you have this bricked up Droll and Lockbird, and say your opponent is on Imperms, Ash Blossoms, Veilers, and I don't know, Ghost Mortars, and you're playing Pearly. That has got to feel atrocious as a Pearly player. All these cards feel like they're directly targeted to you, while they don't do as much against, say, other matchups. Like Veilers and Imperms are horrible against Tearlaments and Unchained and a variety of other cards in the format. Even against Rescue Ace, it's not even that good considering they can play around these cards most of the time. So you can see why Pakawat might be a little bit mad that he has these useless cards in his hand while his opponent is drawing the right non-engine every single time. It feels like a coin flip when you make these decisions. And if you know anything, pro players don't like coin flippy nature. If your cards are only useful half the time, you're only winning half your games. And last I checked, only winning half your games is not going to win you the tournament. In addition, while it didn't necessarily happen in Pac's case, but it's more of a personal anecdote, and go ahead and tell me if you agree with me or not on this, but pro players like to make reads around cards that are popular in the format. But in a 20 deck format, there is no particular cards that are popular. It feels like a random chance when you're trying to play around individual cards. Let's take an example with Nibiru the Primal Being. Look, we've all run into the situation where we have to find a way to play around Nibiru. It's going to end our turn, or we're going to play through it, or something along those lines. Nibiru for YCS Indianapolis was an extremely hit or miss card. Maybe only 30 to 40% of the field are playing Nibiru in their main deck for this event, and that there's a 30% chance that they draw it in a 40 card deck. So you might go in with the idea that, okay, there's a 10 to 15% chance that I get hit with Nibiru. Let's go ahead and probably not play around it and just take that chance. In this unbelievably wide format, how are you supposed to gauge whether you should play around Nibiru or not in a deck that gets hurt by Nibiru? Now apply this to every single piece of non-engine in the format. But this whole wide format thing creates more variance that pro players don't like in their card game. Preparing for these events is, yeah, might as well not prepare at all. So that's one thing why pro players hate diverse formats: non-engine selection and the randomness that it provides.
It's not about beating everything, it's about beating the expected decks. The issue is there's no expected decks right now. Like, I tested the matchups, and I played over 100 matches. Like, there's no exaggeration. I played over 100 matches against Rescuays with Pearly, and I lost 5 times. Like, 5 matches in total.
Once again, it makes these kind of events just impossible to prepare for, that you might as well not prepare at all. And for those who love playing their rogue decks, believe it or not, in smaller formats, rogue decks actually have a better chance at being relevant. Take this. Relevant anecdote time. A couple months back when Duelist Nexus released, the format was still diverse, but there was one threat that was in the public mind, besides Kashtira, of course, and that was Mannadium and Synchron Megapiles. So I was looking through some of the games that were getting new support, and specifically what caught my eye was Unchained. First things first, gameplay was really fun. Going second with the deck is a blast with just breaking boards with straight engine. However, besides having a resilient engine, it had a massive gap in the format. It didn't lose to the must-play hand trap that was Droll and Lockbird. This deck had an unfair edge in said format because it specifically played around a deck building tendency in Droll and Lockbird. I'd watch as people would just -1 their Droll into my field, and I just still end on a completely perfect combo. And then it won 2 YCSs, a ton of regionals, and Unchained, while still a solid deck, definitely isn't the best deck as the new support rolls out. It's these type of situations that Yu-Gi-Oh players love. The ability to find a gap in the format, take advantage of that format, and give themselves an edge by finding new strategies and unlocking the potential of what was supposed to be a rogue deck going into this new format, all of a sudden going on to win YCSs. In a 20 deck format, you can't really do that. There is no deck that has one advantage over the other. There is no secret tech to come through and win an event. But postscript phi here. But what I will say is that the ability to play any deck is honestly a great thing. No one has to buy into any sort of meta strategy. You can play whatever you want. And for a lot of people, that's a great thing. But for competitive events, well, you kind of get the gist. Maybe the biggest meta call for this whole event was the Mannadium strategy, which Triff and Hani were able to pilot very deep into the event, kind of taking advantage of the fact that there weren't any heavy hand traps like Droll and Lockbird showing up in too many main decks. So, you know, the Mannadium theory is when people forget about it, it does pretty well. And here it was. But when there are 20 viable decks, you can't make a science about it because there's no one defining thing about a format. There certainly was the prevalence of Rescuays, but with too many factors before you get to top cut, it's very difficult to take that science and actually make it there and become a YCS winning duelist. I always say this though, we're playing a card game, not chess, but how many times are we going to walk away from an event and say, it is what it is, and there was nothing I can do? And that is the end of a very long video. On that note, folks, peace.